Hello there. Today we're going to be simplifying rational expressions. Essentially what we're going to be doing is putting it all together, the last 3 lessons that you have learned, into one big fraction. So the first thing we're going to do is think about how we simplified radicals without variables. It's the same step as before. You're going to find the biggest perfect square that goes into the number under the radical, pull that perfect square out, and leave the other number inside. And while you're doing that, make sure any numbers on the outside, you actually multiply them together. You're also going to simplify the skills from what we did with the variables. It's the same exact steps. So you've gone through, you're going to do that first. You're going to simplify the radical, look at the variables on the inside of the radical, do that divide by 2 with the exponents, leave the other guys inside. After we go through and do everything with the radicals, we're going to end by simplifying rational expressions, those skills. Okay, think back to what we were doing. We're going to be dividing the coefficient of the radical by the denominator. Remember to divide the numbers and subtract the exponents. And don't do anything with the numbers and variables that have been left under the radical. So these are the steps you're going to do. Step number 1, simplify the radical. Step number 2, simplify the numerator. And step number 3, simplify the fraction. Remember, in step 1, we're going to do numbers and variables, and you can do it all at the same time. So let's see an example. So step number 1 is simplify the radical. So think back to what we did in our last unit. I'm focusing first on 98x to the third. And so 98, the biggest perfect square that goes into it, is 49. Specifically, this is 49 times 2. The square root of 49 is 7. So I'm going to pull out a 7, and I'm going to make sure it gets multiplied by that 4. X to the third power, well, 3 divided by 2, the biggest number is 1, so I'm going to pull out an x, but I have a leftover x. And here's that leftover 2 from the 98. So step number 1 is to simplify the radical. When I simplify it, I get 7 and an x that gets to come out, and the leftovers, 2 and x, stays in. So then the next thing I want to do is simplify my numerator. 4 times 7 is 28, and x to the 7th second times x is x to the third. Now that we've simplified that, now we're going to simplify the fraction. I'm not going to touch this radical now. I've already simplified it, so I'm not going to take it any further. I'm focusing only on this. So divide the coefficients. 28 divided by 2 is 14, and I'm going to do x to the third minus 1, and that's what I have going on right here. See how I didn't do anything with the radical? Well, 3 minus 1 is 2, so I end up with 14 x to the second square root 2x. I have no negative exponents, so I know I'm finished with this problem. Let's move on to number 2. In this one here, once again, we're going to start by simplifying this radical. So looking at the numbers, 8 is divisible by 4. That's our perfect square in the number 8. So I'm going to take out a 2 because the square root of 4 is 2. Remember, there's an 8 on the outside already. I'm going to times it by that new 2. X to the 4th power, where 4 divided by 2 is 2. So I'm going to take out an x squared. There was already an x on the outside. This square root of 2 is from that 8. I had no x's left over. So now I just simplified my radical. I'm going to simplify the numerator. 8 times 2 is 16. X to the first times x squared is x to the third. So now I'm ready to simplify the fraction. I'm not going to do anything with the square root of 2. 16 over 3 cannot be simplified any farther and is going to stay the same. However, I can do 3 minus 4 because that is what's in common, so I'm going to subtract my exponents. Well, 3 minus 4 gives me a negative 1. Final answers cannot contain a negative exponent. So what I'm going to do is take that and apply that very first rule you learned, and I'm going to move it to the opposite side of the fraction. So this is our final answer. 16 square root of 2 all over 3x. Another example here, I have a negative 5 square root 30 u squared v over 3. So I'm taking a look on the inside, and I'm going to simplify anything I can in here. The number 30 has no perfect squares that divides into it. 30 is divisible by 1, 2, 5, 6, and 10. None of those numbers can easily go or are perfect squares. So I'm going to move on and look at my variables. And I see I have u squared. Well, 2 divided by 1 is 1. So I'm going to not take any numbers out, but I am going to take out one of the variables. The 30 stays inside, the v stays inside, and I can't go any further than what I have here. I'm not going to do 30 divided by 3 because one's in the radical and one is not. So this is a final answer. Last example here. Again, don't be intimidated by the size. Just take it one step at a time. So the first thing to do is simplify the radical. When you simplify with the numbers, I find that square root of 256 is a whole number. Even if you went through the process of trying to find the largest perfect square starting at 144, what you'll end up finding is that square root of 256 becomes 16. So what I have is 6 times 16. Moving on to my variables, the next thing I have is the x. Well, that's to the first power, so I cannot take any more x out. I still have an x squared in the beginning, so I'm keeping it there. Y to the third, if I do 3 divided by 2, I can take out one of the y's. I already have a y to the fourth. So all that's left is a single x and a single y inside the radical. So I simplify the radical. Now I'm ready to simplify my numerator. 6 times 16 is 96. X squared had nobody to combine with, but the two y's give me y to the fifth. If you haven't already noticed, I have a negative that's being brought along the whole way. So now I'm ready to simplify my fraction, and I'm not going to touch what's under the radical now. That part is finished. 96 divided by 4 is 24. Again, I had a negative here, so I need to make sure I kept with it. For the x's, I'm going to do 2 minus 3, and for the y's, I'm going to do 5 minus 2. When I simplify that, I get x to the negative 1 and y to the positive 3. Once again, I cannot have a negative exponent, so I'm going to take x and x alone and put it in the denominator. Sorry about that. Go ahead and hit the pause button and try these couple of problems. And when you're done trying, unpause and check your answers. So here are the correct answers. I hope you did well. If not, ask your teacher and go ahead and start working on that practice.